Perfect. Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for taking this time out of your busy day. I know that the different policies that are coming through at the public and private level are causing a little bit of a strain. So if you are the parent or student at school, feel free to connect with each other through the chat. I want you to consider this call a networking opportunity because it's important for parents and students to get together. So you can use the chat as an opportunity to do that. You can select who you want to talk to in the drop down. And also at any time you can, if you're on a PC, on a desktop computer, you can save the chat by using the 3 ellipses in the input box. So we're recording this call, so a lot of information will come out, so you'll have the opportunity to be able to listen to the recording later. We've already muted you all, so please keep yourself muted during the forum. And then we will offer time for some Q&A as well. And so at some point too, I'll ask Anna and Kevin to put their contact information in the chat box, maybe towards the end. So again, I just want to thank you for coming, because the fact that you're here means that you are thinking differently to the mainstream. And so you're willing to put your actions behind the way you're thinking, which is important. And so if your convictions happen to echo mine, what we know, and the reason why we're here, is that there's no one size that fits all in medicine. That we have inherently the God-given right to choose what goes into our bodies. And so without body sovereignty, then we lose control of really who we are. And so we're in a pivotal time of history. And so it's important that we ask ourselves, who do we want to be? How do we want to show up? What actions do we want to take? Especially as we are given the opportunity for this current climate to check in with our own basic ethics and morality, and to find out what really does work for us. So one thing I wanted you to just connect with before we start is that we are in community, and this webinar shows us that we are in community. So I want you to just not feel alone in this, and we've brought together some experts to be able to help navigate the delicate nature of this time. So for me, my name is Andrea Grace. I have a natural healing center here in Berkeley Heights. So I practice complementary and alternative medicines. And so for me, medical freedom is a given. Our mission statement is non-invasive preventative care. So naturally, I look at alternative, biocompatible and bioavailable early intervention and preventative prophylactic ways of treating and keeping us well. So joining me in this forum is Anna Lopez. So she is an established medical freedom advocate out of Hunterdon County, and she's the founder of njstandsup.org. So I recommend, if you haven't already, signing up for the newsletter on njstandsup.org. It's one word. And we also have Kevin Barry. We invited him to join us. He's an attorney in New York with the, Kevin, can you pronounce that for me?
Mermigas.
Oh, thank you. I would have butchered it. The Mermigas group, yes. Law group. And so he's been helping people with religious exemptions for more than 20 years. He's a former federal lawyer who's advocated for vaccine rights at the state, national, and international level. And so we're bringing this panel together to just help go into a deeper dive into what the purpose and how to fulfill in the best way possible a religious exemption. And so one thing that I wanted to convey before I pass it on is that it's not a loophole. It's just that this current climate has created the opportunity, I guess, and the necessity to, for some reason, have to put our deeply held spiritual and religious beliefs on paper to make a statement about it. And that statement is what's called a religious exemption. So I'm going to hand it off. I'm glad you're here. So maybe Anna, you can share your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you both for being here tonight. A lot of students and parents have been reaching out, concerned about the deadline for colleges, but in general, we keep hearing more and more, obviously, as everybody knows, about, possibility of their employers or unions or different, states taking various actions. So, I mean, looking at the legal aspect is so important, especially since there are cases coming forward, and it's a very confusing time. So I'm just looking forward to helping people get some more clarity on this, and offering any type of support we can in terms of writing letters. I know Kevin also is doing the same. We have a lot of questions that we already know everybody has. So go ahead.
Yeah, good. Thanks everyone for coming. Yeah, and I'll try to wrap up the presentation part like by 7 o'clock, so we can get at least a half hour of questions in. But the headline takeaway is get your religious exemption in as soon as possible, no matter whether it's for work or for school, because once it's in, that opens up, if it's approved, once it's in, that opens up an entire slew of religious discrimination issues in your favor. Your employer is not allowed under state and federal law to discriminate against you on your religious beliefs. Neither is your school. And your school, if you look in their very beginning of any of the school's student handbooks, they list all of the things that they do not discriminate against. Most of those are from Title VII of the federal law. We don't discriminate against race, color, creed, sexual orientation, and religion. Religion is on all of those lists. What that's called in law is a protected class. So once you're in a protected class, you cannot be discriminated against. In New York, not only can your employer or your school not discriminate against you for a protected class under Section 296 of the Human Rights Law, also any individual who works for your institution can be personally sued for violating your human rights. And it even uses the word coerce, that you cannot coerce an employee or a student to go against their religious beliefs, which is exactly what they're all doing. So the model that we have been very successful with is doing a 1-2 punch, where what people are doing that is a mistake when they're trying to send in their religious exemption. Like if your religion exemption starts with pursuant to statute, blah, blah, blah of my state law protecting religious freedom, like you go right in the discard pile right there, because you're not talking about your faith. So in the 1-2 punch, it would be better to write a pure religious exemption and have it followed up by a lawyer letter from me or another lawyer, whoever you want to go with, which talks about how it's a violation of human rights, how it's a violation of the Nuremberg Code, how it's a violation of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights, which is from 2005, which says that you can withdraw consent to a vaccine, or they use preventative medicine at any time for any reason without disadvantage or prejudice. That's the human rights and bioethics standard for the globe, unanimously adopted by 193 countries in 2005. So that's a more modern version of the Nuremberg Code, which is 1947. So in summary, you have once you assert them, you have religious discrimination rights in state law, federal law, international law, that when we're sending them to the employers and the presidents of universities, I think they're learning something new. I think they don't know this, right? Like it's not in the mainstream media that like Article 3 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics and Human Rights says that the individual shall take priority over science or society. That's the bioethics standard. That's what was learned from the horrors of World War II, is that when you when you cede control over what goes into someone's body to the state, it doesn't end well. That's the international bioethics standard. And this whole thing that you're supposed to light yourself on fire to protect your neighbor, like that is not the bioethics standard in the world. So that's pharma propaganda again. But if you put that in your religious exemption, you're on shaky footing, and you don't need to. And the primary reason you don't need to is that every vaccine for COVID-19 that's available in the United States, what either has a fetal cell issue along its development or testing. Every single one, all three, including the Novavax vaccine, which might be the fourth EUA approved product. So there's been, I think, some confusion about what will happen with a religious exemption if these vaccines move from emergency use authorization to FDA licensed, and that's not the case. Your religious exemption survives. Your religious rights, it doesn't matter about what's in the product, and your religious opposition to the product, notwithstanding what the government licenses it as. But one thing that is true, especially with EUA, and probably if it gets FDA licensed, is the liability protection is for the manufacturer, is for the vaccine manufacturer, and for the medical people who inject it into you, for the doctors or the CVS or the Walgreens staff, but who is not among those who are not protected under the PrEP Act are employers and schools. So in the lawyer letter that we send in support of your religious exemption, we point that out to them. So look at it from their perspective. From their perspective, you have an employee or a student, and you have a policy that says you have to do this. The employee or the student comes and puts in writing they do not want to do it. And there's a paper trail of that and a lawyer letter in support of it. And then if you're coerced into doing it to keep your education on track or to keep your job, and later you have an adverse reaction to that vaccine, they are liable. They don't know this. Like this is concept that everybody has liability protection. It's not everybody. It's not everybody. It's not them, right? And we don't know why we're having a very high rate of success with the exemptions we're putting in. All that we get back is approved, right? They don't come back and they don't say approved because holy shit, we're liable. Like it doesn't say that, right? But I think has a big impact on them. And one thing we've seen that is perhaps a reaction to that is some schools and some employers aren't mandating it. They're just saying it's required, and they're saying it's required, and there are consequences if you don't, like masking or social distancing, or so if your employer or your school is doing that, just still send them a religious exemption request, right? Send them, oh, hey, by the way, thanks for not mandating, but I want you to know that my opposition to this is religious, and here's why. And that will open up all of the religious discrimination protections for you. And there are a couple of schools that have been really bad on this. Hofstra on Long Island has been particularly bad at that, which is disappointing to me because that's where I went to law school. And also, so many of the Jesuit colleges, the Catholic Jesuit colleges like Fordham has been very difficult. Boston College is a Jesuit school. They've been very difficult. And it's on a misunderstanding, ironically, a misunderstanding of what it means to be Catholic and Christian. You know, the Pope is not infallible. That's been gone for a couple of centuries. And that the Pope made some off the cuff comments about that he thought it was a good idea to get the vaccine is not determinative on what Catholics should be doing. But a lot of the schools are treating it that way. So, so we're encouraging people who are Catholic just to say that you're Christian in your religious exemption, just so they don't play the Pope card on you.
And just to recap that in their statement, in their exemption statement, they're not including any of the law. The letter that you're writing on their behalf is what contains the law. So that should be separate. I just want to make that
Yeah, I think
clear.
that's right. When their policy is saying it's a mandate and you have religious and medical exemptions, they know what the law is, right? They wouldn't be sending that out if they didn't know what the law is, right? So it's a little bit of a trap for the employee or the student, because if you start talking about legal things or concerns about adverse reactions, as soon as you start talking in that kind of language, they're looking to take out the red pen and draw a big X across your exemption. Because and then that's another difference from pre-COVID, from pre-2019. Like there was a time you like these things were routinely approved before 2019, and people who submitted them, or the reviewers were not looking to find ways to not accept them. And at this point, they are looking for ways to not accept them. So I think people have to adjust to that. And we have, and I'll find it and put it in the chat. The Charlotte Lozier Institute, Lozier. They're in DC, and they have a very good chart which outlines all of the issues with every COVID vaccine available in the US and available in the world, and to what extent there is a fetal cell issue there. And here's something I want to say to some people who are confusing, you know, like, oh, that they who might be pro-life politically or support the Roe versus Wade decision. It's a different thing. It's not, you can have that view and be against fetal cells in vaccines. Those are not incompatible views. And I had some people who were Jewish who viewed, oh, I don't want to mention fetal cells, that's Christian conservatives. And I'm like, no, it's not. like there is no biological question that a fetus is alive, right? That is the best example of that is test tube babies. Like you can that once the sperm and the egg meet, you can the cell division begins and goes to full time. So it's alive. So the fetal cell issue is you participating in someone else's abortion in a way that Roe versus Wade does not involve you. That's someone else, and those are competing interests between a fetus and a mother, not just the fetus. So you can have both of those views and be consistent in your beliefs. Because I know that's I've wasted way too much time talking to individual people about that. So I think I hopefully just took care of 100 birds with one stone.
Right, and there's so many other things that could be used from religious texts besides, or you can apply "Thou shalt not kill" to yourself. Even that's the example that we say. If you know that something can harm you, or just change your natural body that God gave you. You're like, right, because you got, if you believe that God, you were made in God's image, or your body is made perfect as it should be, and your natural immune system can protect you. There's nothing that you should be doing to interfere with that. And knowing that you could be doing something that's harming you is just as equally in texts religiously, that you can, you don't need to say the exact verbiage. You don't need a specific quote. You can just state it as is in your own words.
Absolutely. And it is also possible in the future that there would be quote unquote ethically made COVID vaccines. So that's not the only, I agree with you, Anna, that's not the only argument to put forward now, but that will get you 90% of the way there. And then all those other arguments in every faith, like having you're responsible for your own religiously formed conscience. That's universal. And again, on the model of the Nuremberg Code, if some authority in your church tells you to do something that's morally wrong, you don't do it just because they told you to, right? And that's like an obvious example that we're all responsible for our own moral conscience, and so that's in there as well.
And so what happens if the exemption gets denied? Denied.
Well, if it gets denied, like we've had a few successes by appealing, like rattling their cage a little bit harder, and they will go forward. But I think there's going to end up being litigation, and so I would think if your school or your employer, if you're putting them in and they're starting to get denied, you're probably not the only one. They've probably made a decision high up the food chain at the enterprise, either the school or the company, and start seeking out other people to keep costs down, because litigation can be expensive. I think there's a couple of colleges in New York and New Jersey that we're going to have to sue. I would say Hofstra is like at the top of the list. We're probably going to have to sue Binghamton. We're going to probably have to sue St. John Fisher in Rochester, because these are schools that are routinely turning away a whole lot of people, and especially if it's the students. And I can't tell in this group whether it's parents of students or people for themselves, but build up your students. Like if you're it's hard for them right now. They just had 1 year of their college experience taken away from them in the last 12 months. They're dying to get back to campus, and there's a whole lot of pressure coming from media. It's like, oh, your parents are crazy. You're over 18. You make your own decisions, and I've heard way too many stories from parents who were going to use our service, and they call and say, never mind. She really wants to get back to campus. She went to CVS and got the shot, right? So if your kid has made it this far, they don't want it, right? And I just heard a scenario today. This is in New Jersey, actually, at Drew University. Drew just announced that they're going to have a masks for everyone policy. Masks for everyone indoor, whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. So if you're a student at a school like that, and you went out and got the vaccine so you wouldn't have to wear a mask, and now you've put your long-term health at risk. You've joined the experiment after not wanting to join the experiment so you wouldn't have to wear a mask, and you find out today you're wearing a mask anyway. So it's the policies being put out by the schools and the universities and the employers is such a moving target. Like if you need one more reason to stick to your principles, that stick to your principles. Like and the other message for parents of college age kids, if they don't graduate, if I remember being that age and feeling pressure, like, oh, I want to graduate on time. I'm eager to get into the workforce, but looking back on it, if I graduated at 23 versus 22 and had a gap year, how would that have changed my life? Not at all. Looking back from this perspective. So rather than put your long-term health at risk, and there are no safety studies. I'm tired of my friends who disagree with this. I don't want to have long arguments with them anymore. I just say, can you please send me the animal and human safety studies for this? Send me those so I can review them, and then we'll pick up the conversation. And then like 2 days later, I get I can't find any. Like, exactly, there aren't any. So like, if you want to preserve your daughter's chance if she wants to have a full choice of deciding to be a mother in the future, this would be a time to perhaps not take the experiment, because there have been no long-term fertility studies. They just haven't. And for the boys with the myocarditis issue, my scientist friends tell me that if this had been an ordinary clinical trial, that the myocarditis issue alone would have prevented the product from ever getting to market. That it's causing heart damage on young boys, young males. You don't heart cells once damaged are damaged forever. Heart cells don't regenerate. There are other organs if they have injured, like liver and kidney cells can regenerate. Heart cells don't. If they're damaged now, they're damaged forever. And why are you taking that risk for something in that age group that's 99.997% survivable? There is nothing on the other side of the scale. There's nothing on the other side of the scale that justifies that risk.
And so, Kevin, getting back to the practicalities of submitting the exemption, should they use the form that their employer or the school gives them, or should they write their own and then send it, perhaps certified return receipt, so that they're starting to create a paper trail? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think either of those work. I think you can't go wrong with certified and creating a paper trail that way. But your emails are time stamped as well, so you'll have a date and timestamp on your email. And I think regarding the forms, a lot of the schools are requiring you to agree in advance to like some pretty draconian conditions, or they would, by not filling out the form or not initialing all these requirements, that your religious exemption will not be considered, or you'll fail that just on those. So I'm suggesting that people hold their nose, grit their teeth, and initial those forms and check those boxes, so you get the religious exemption. And then otherwise you're out of the game. Otherwise unless you're independently wealthy and can hire a lawyer for $10,000 to try to get your job back or try to get your position at your school back, because no one knows whether they're actually going to try to enforce this, right? Like, what I think a good analogy is with the integration of the school in Alabama in the 60s. What's going to happen when the African-American girl walks past George Wallace and tries to register at the University of Alabama? You know what happened? She registered. She registered and went to school, right? So I think come September, again, there's no way of knowing what's going to happen, because Murphy and Cuomo, especially in the Northeast, like they seem to be leapfrogging each other to see who can come up with the worst policy, like day by day. And I think that's partly why the universities have not come out with more firm policies themselves. Like they're waiting for guidance from above, and there is no firm guidance from above because they change their policies every week. So again, I don't know what to. The only thing that I can say for certain is get yourself your religious exemption approved by any means necessary, and then you're part of a protected class that cannot be discriminated against.
Right. We just want to make sure that they expedite it in the best way, from the beginning.
Right. But I think if you're checking those boxes, or you're initialing things that you don't agree with, if you're agreeing to conditions that have not happened yet, there's a very strong argument that was done under duress, which would invalidate it. Again, when on the other side of the equation, if you don't, you have no religious exemption. Right. Again, you hear what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not saying it, it's not a good, in a perfect world, you get out the red pen yourself, draw lines through it and say, this is ridiculous. Of course, I don't agree with these things. Right. But if doing that means you don't get the religious exemption and you don't trigger those religious discrimination rights, I don't think you've gained anything.
So the volition of submitting it isn't enough, you're saying? You're saying that it needs to be submitted through the channels that they're setting up for you to submit it through.
Yeah, well, on the ones that have forms with like 3 lines, like tell us your religious beliefs in 3 lines, I just write "see attached" on that. You attach your letter, right? But usually, what I've seen as part of those things, there's usually a 1-page checklist or initial these 4 things, and one that's somewhat routine that throws people off is that, like, if there's a COVID outbreak on campus, that you have to stay away until it's over. that's been routine. That's been a routine part of exemptions for decades. You know, that if you, for example, if you have a exemption to the meningitis vaccine or measles, and you're living on campus, you've always agreed that if there was a measles outbreak or meningitis outbreak, you would leave campus. That's not new. That concept's not new.
Mm.
But again, and how they'll apply that this year, because if people are savvy enough to be on this call, they know that the PCR test is hopelessly flawed, and so what they're going to call outbreaks on campuses, because the CDC defines an outbreak as 3 cases. So but are they really going to trigger that 5 days a week, you know, every week for the next 6 months, or are they? Do they know they're on very shaky legal ground to have these mandates at all? And this is an enormous coercion project. This is an enormous coercion project. I can guarantee there were hundreds of state and federal employees who this week made, against their will, made appointments to get the vaccine because they think they have to. They don't have to, but you have to stand firm and stare them down. They're trying to coerce you to do it. They're trying to coerce you against your beliefs to do this.
And somebody asked about the military.
I'm not an expert on that. I haven't done that with any military clients yet. I know they have a higher standard, you know, that than civilians. So I'm not sure what to do about the military people. I think they still have their rights. I would advance their rights. I would delay. But and this is something that we've seen in the case, the Houston Methodist case of the hospital workers, and the Indiana University case, in which said that there was a federal court said that they could have the COVID vaccine mandate as long as they had exemptions. Both of those cases said, if you're the hospital worker, if you don't like the hospital's policy, leave the job, go get another job somewhere else. The Indiana University case, the judge and the appeal, which came out this week in favor of the school against the students, said you have the option to transfer. So those things are very, it's kind of, when I was reading those decisions, I think the judges were pretty flippant, you know, that like as if that's not a very difficult thing to do. Oh, oh, you've been going to school for 3 years somewhere else, you're a senior, just transfer. Just leave your friends behind, leave your boyfriend, leave your girlfriend, you know, leave your family, you know, see if your credits transfer, go out of state. It's not that easy, right? But that seems to be the environment that we're in.
Should I start going through the questions in the chat?
Sure.
So somebody said that in their exemption, they've been requested to provide the name of the church. So this is Mary's question, the name of the church and the phone number. And what if it's not a Christian church? Yeah,
I would say those things, they're not allowed to ask those things. So in the lawyer letter that we're sending in support, we mentioned that and some people if you can get one from, in the interest of speed and ease, if your pastor, your rabbi, if you have a good relationship with them, they don't have to agree with your view on the vaccine. They just would be vouching that you're a person of faith, that I know this person and they're genuine. If you can get one, that's the easy path. But even in cases where we have one, we submit it in protest, saying, you know, this is an outrageous request and it's an unlawful one.
Okay. Yeah, that's helpful, I think.
Yeah.
All right. So related to that, if you're a Catholic, can a letter from a priest trump the hierarchy, or do you advise leaving off the Catholic part altogether?
I would, in the RE, in the religious exemption letter itself, I'd leave off the Catholic part. But if you've got something from a priest on letterhead, submit it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so somebody's asking again about, do you recommend we send our personal letter to our employer, or do we need it accompanied with the lawyer letter?
That's a delicate question, and it depends what kind of employer you have. If it's if it's a small company and everybody gets along, um, I have some banker friends and like hedge fund people who are doing this, who really want to keep their job and they want to keep their reputation, and they feel it would be too aggressive to send a lawyer letter in, so they're not opting for that second wave. But there are some other ones, like we have one person who works at Madison Square Garden, um, and we're she was she works in the ticket office. I'll just do this story quick. So she offered she has a religious exemption. She had a religious belief, fetal cell based. They denied it. She offered as a reasonable accommodation to wear a mask while working, and she sits behind bulletproof glass. I'm not aware of any studies that COVID can get through bulletproof glass if it sneaks past her mask. And they still said no. But that's a conglomerate. That's $1 billion company. All the employees are numbers. Like there was another one. A lot of people who they work. It's an office of like 40 people. Everybody knows each other. They've been working from home for 18 months already. They've been capable of doing their job. So they're submitting much more kinder, gentler letters, not like attorney threatening letters, that say, I would like the religious exemption, uh, and they're submitting what they think the reasonable accommodation would be. Said, I've been working from home for the last 12 months. I've been doing it very capably. I'd like to continue doing that. And on the occasion when I have to physically come into the office, I will willing to wear a mask and socially distance.
Okay, so they're proactively offering their own accommodation.
Correct.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's where like you have to know your own situation.
Yeah,
Yeah, because like a lot of people with their jobs don't want to come in guns blazing.
sure. Yeah, it's delicate.
Yeah, so but you can, again, you can have in reserve guns blazing, right? Like if they say no, if they're not being reasonable with you, then you can bring us in, and partly through like Jim Ramirez and I, we led the legal challenge against the religious exemption repeal in New York State, and we're doing it for Connecticut as well right now. And so we have some very, very good expert opinions from religious leaders and scientists in this field, that we're using for those cases, that we can bring in the heavy guns if necessary for the employers and the schools. But the goal here is in most of these cases, people don't want to litigate.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a big undertaking. So I think just what I want to convey too, or so somebody's asked, so what happens if they eliminate religious exemptions for adults? But what we're saying here, and the reason for this forum, is to point out that to get your religious statement in, your religious exemption in, because you're protected by the law as it's written, regardless of at the state level having the exemption laws. Is that right?
Right.
That the civil rights law is what's protecting you.
Federal and state.
And state.
Yeah, but you
over and above the exemption laws.
Right. What is the unfortunate thing in the way the process works is you can get your job restored federally from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC, but that might take 2 years. Right? You can go through that process, and how do you feed your family for the 2 years while you're waiting for your job to be restored? And the litigation can be time consuming, expensive, and you don't know ultimately if you'll succeed. And so again, I think most people are trying to avoid litigation. And if there's going to be litigation with your employees or your school, as you were saying earlier, connect, right? Find your community if nothing else, find those 20, 30 other students, find those 20, 30 other employees, just so you can pool resources, for the cost of litigation.
So there are a ton of questions about including the testing in your religious exemption letter.
Yeah, well, the testing is going to, again, I'm bad at sugarcoating things, so and I'm not going to do it now. I'm not going to start now. Maybe I'll start tomorrow. But if the standard is a reasonable accommodation, right? If your exemption's approved, then they need to have a reasonable accommodation for you. So we've had a couple of situations where the exemption was approved, so no vaccine, which is great news. Then also they agreed to no masks because this person had some asthma issues. And then on testing, they conceded no PCR testing, nothing invasive in the nasal, but they wanted saliva testing. And that ended up being accepted. And I thought that was like a model that could be followed. That if an employer or a campus is making an argument that they have to, that they feel they have to do some kind of testing. I think if you were trying to litigate and you went in front of a judge and the employer said, or the school said, we back down on the vaccine, we back down on the mask, we back down on the invasive nasal test, and we wanted them to spit in a cup and they refused. I'm not sure if if a judge would consider that reasonable on the employee or the student's part, right? So I think because again, the judges, and this is an unfortunate truth, judges are pretty hardwired to defer to experts, and in all kinds of cases, they're seeking expert testimony, and on these kind of public health related cases, they have a strong tendency to defer to state health departments and the CDC and the WHO, and like all of the science that we're all reading, that we're all seeing on our social media feeds. They're not seeing that. They're not reading it. The Department of Health is not agreeing with that. The CDC is not agreeing with that, and they have a strong tendency to defer to that. And one thing I'll say also in the appeal, it's only a 4-page decision on the Indiana University case. Went to the appellate division, and the Indiana University appellate court decided with the school against the students, and said that one of the reasons they did is because it's the lowest standard of judicial scrutiny. It's a rational basis test. So when it's the lowest standard of judicial scrutiny, that's almost like from a separation of powers situation, that the legislature is supposedly responsible to the people. So if a judge is reviewing something the legislature did, and the standard is rational basis, that is so low. You just have to show that they're being rational. You're not going to win. When you have a fundamental right, like religion, when you have a fundamental right, now the standard goes to the highest standard, where they have to show a compelling state interest and that it's narrowly tailored to achieve that goal. So when you get your religious exemption, you go from the lowest standard to the highest standard, which is why you want to get your religious exemption. And people who think they can get medical, that's virtually impossible. It's virtually impossible to get a medical exemption, partly because the doctors are all licensed by whatever state they practice in. They know that their industry and the state does not want them to be writing exemptions. So you're asking them to put a bullseye on their back that could harm or end their careers. And most of them aren't willing to do that on the vaccine issue. Plus, even if and I know that one case that was famous in New York for Ali and Aaron Siri successfully got that overturned. That child who was injured by prior vaccines was in a wheelchair, he had 4 of his 5 DPT vaccines, and his treating physician gave him an exemption for his 5th, and the school denied it. And they had to go to court to not have the kid who already had 4 out of 5 of his DPTs not get the 5th. That's what medical exemptions are like.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
so
and we've heard the same from Dr. Wax, and a number of doctors have said this before, but we do have a replay of that piece from a medical doctor who is not considered an anti-vax doctor even. And he also agreed that you should not even really, he said, obviously people say if you can get both, sure, go ahead, but just go for the religious, because you can include that as kind of like a faith-based reason. I have all of my vaccines. I had a change of heart. I think there were some questions in here. If I've had all my vaccinations before, can I still use a religious exemption? And I think the answer is absolutely yes. You can have a change of heart. Things happen in your life where you open your eyes to various things like religion or otherwise, and you have more knowledge, and based on that knowledge you can make different decisions for yourself. Even before you were 18, your health decisions were made by your parents. Now that you're an adult, you have your own perspective, right?
yeah, I agree with that 100%. And you can also only apply your religious principles to what you know. So if you didn't know about the fetal cell issue, and you didn't know that all the COVID-19 vaccines have fetal cell issues in them, if you didn't know that before, how can you apply your principles to that? But now that you know them and you have your religious principles, so you're applying your religious principles in a new way based on new information.
Some other questions I think we should get to. I lost one. Somebody was asking about in New Jersey specifically, if we lost the religious exemption, would it remove, I think, the First Amendment right, which I don't. Obviously, it doesn't change anything about our First Amendment right and our religious freedom. I think what I've heard before is that it would need to be taken to the Supreme Court to prove that the religious exemption was unlawful. Is
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah, from the religious exemption on the statute for K through 12, like that doesn't apply to colleges and employment.
Right. Yeah,
So,
that's another, exactly. Thank you. To explain that more clearly for people, there's a lot of people that have been using that religious exemption. I forget what it's called, statute, or what do we call that?
yeah, well, I mean, mentioning if you're a college student that had a religious exemption previously, that's worth mentioning it, in your religious exemption, because it shows that it's not a new thing for you. It's worth mentioning, but it's not controlling. It doesn't mean they have to approve it. It's another point in your favor that will likely help you get it approved, but it's not determinative. So I would definitely mention it, but in New Jersey, I'm not aware of any statute that specifically talks about colleges, but so your adult protections are in the civil rights and human rights law, and the anti-discrimination laws against religion.
Right, which doesn't change. Basically, yeah. Although it certainly wouldn't help anybody if we lost that religious exemption for K through 12.
Correct. That's right.
So there was another question about this is more about colleges, and certainly I think the employment law pretty much covers the same thing as colleges, right? Or do employees have more rights than students?
It's similar, but the employees would generally be in a better position to sue the employer than the depending on the size of your company, than the student. Because universities have endowments and endless resources and staff attorneys, and most students are have DoorDash jobs and are taking down student loans, and they're not necessarily in a position to hire attorneys, whereas adults in the workforce are more capable of doing that.
Mm.
Really?
Yeah, and it's really disgusting what the universities are doing. It's completely, it's disgusting, because they're also waiting right now. Like right now, for all these students, the money is due. Right, they're supposed to take down loans that they're gonna have to pay back for years and years and years and years and years. And school starts in a month, and most of the schools are not giving them clear indication of what the policy is going to be. It's really disgusting.
Right, right. So how do you agree? Like some of these schools have forms, right? Click, 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 and you're agreeing to things. What do you say? We tell people not to use the forms like that. What is your opinion?
I think I'd have to read the individual schools' forms, right? But if they're saying that you will not get a religious exemption if you don't fill out the forms, I'm suggesting that people grit their teeth and fill out the forms
Hmm.
and get the religious exemption. And then when they try to enforce anything against you, it was under duress. You know,
Right, right.
yeah. Again, it could not be more clear that it's under duress. Like it's not going to be that judges aren't as corrupt as people think. Like judges aren't stupid. You don't get to be a judge for being stupid.
Wow.
So they'll be able to see that they held the approval hostage,
Hmm.
right? And
But
it's
I'm
also
sorry.
a fundamental of contract law that there needs to be a meeting of the minds. So when you're agreeing to conditions in the future that have not that aren't even clearly put out, that's not a contract. And one other thing I'll say about contract law, and it's going to be very interesting in the next year or two to see how all this shakes out in the courts, because like, if you're a student entering junior, senior year, if you didn't sign, if your agreement by attending the school and you're the customer of the school, and they change the contract unilaterally in the middle, what do they owe you for doing that? Like, do they owe you, if you're going to senior year and they're not going to let you graduate, and you made an investment in getting a degree from that institution, now you can't get it. Do they owe you the last 3 years payments?
I mean, it certainly seems like a theft of service.
Yeah, right. We're gonna find
Right there.
right, but nobody knows how this is going to work out because it's never happened before. That's one of the things. Like, it's a little bit frustrating for me because a lot of people, and I think other attorneys, because like people are asking us what's going to happen, how's this going to work out? It's like there's no case to look at. There's nothing. This has never happened. It's an absurdity what's happening right now. I think everybody knows this is crazy. But how courts are going to sort it out in the future, it's very interesting to see what the judges are so far saying. The federal judges are so far saying, transfer, go somewhere else,
Yeah.
right? And usually, and you know what, that's maybe not a bad plan. Like again, why would you look at it this way? Why do you want to spend tens of thousands of dollars to a place that's going to discriminate against you?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we're coming up to time, and I want to be mindful of your time. So some people are asking, what does it cost to have a lawyer letter accompanying their exemptions? Can you help with that? Are you willing to
Sure, yeah.
speak to that?
What we're currently charging for that, for the package of both, is
Okay.
$900 for the lawyer letter and helping draft, edit, and straighten out the religious exemption to make it as pure as possible, and then pile up afterwards with the lawyer letter. And I think that's been very effective for the universities. And it's 600 or 590 for just the RE. And I think a lot of the employees are going that route because they don't want to be too aggressive with their employers.
Could you repeat the package amount again?
Yeah, 900 for the package and 590 for the RE.
Just for the religious exemption, right?
Right.
So we'll certainly share your information when we send out the recording to everyone. So that answers probably, there's people wondering, are they going to get a recording? Absolutely. We're going to be sharing this widely. And
Yeah.
I did see some comments though that people also really quickly did not want to, if they didn't want to submit to the saliva testing still. So, and this brings up kind of what we were talking about before with the, before the call about the, how all procedures, all medical procedures do have liability, or something, not liability. What'd you say?
Coverage
No, they have,
under the exemption.
well, no, well, it could be, I thought it could be covered. I've been saying you could cover anything, any medical procedure could be covered under religious exemption technically, because there could be some type of misdiagnosis, or there's some type of risk carried from anything, including a test. So you should be able to refuse technically anything that's done to you or asked of you.
Yeah, it's part of my job not to waste your money, you know. So if someone wants to hire me and litigate against a school or employer to not spit in a cup, if you've got all those other things, and knowing that you're probably going to lose, but you want to go to court for it and you can afford it and you want to try to make a point, great. I mean,
Thank you for clarifying that.
I would do it, but I would tell you, I think that's, you know, I would say I think you have too much money if you want to do that. Or the other thing is to find foundations to do that. That's why like there are foundations that can do those kind of things. Try to find someone to underwrite that case, right? Because I mean that is an interesting case, you know. But what we're dealing with are individual people. Like we're dealing with real people where the rubber meets the road, right? And I think that can be expensive, and I don't think that the likelihood of success I think is small. So I mean, but I would go forward with it, but I don't think it would work.
Okay, very good. So I think we'll close it off here. I just want to thank you, Kevin, for your time, and Anna as well. It's greatly appreciated, and we'll be sending the recording out within 48 hours.
Okay, good. Well, again, thanks everybody, and I'll download the. How long do I have to download the chat so I can see what other questions are? Maybe I can.
I think you could do it right now if you go to the three dots and save chat. All right.
Yeah. Okay. Done.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, it's the Charlotte Lozier Institute is you can get that's where you can get the chart. If you're doing this on your own, attach that to your RE. If you're mentioning fetal cells, send that in, because I think that's an eye opener to employers and schools.
We added that link in the chat.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
That was there for everybody. Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Good night, everybody.